this recent conversation that the pivot had with Jamarcus Russell, which that name rings bells, from Louisiana all the way up to New York.
Hmm.
Jamarcus Russell, both for his stature in terms of his size, but then also the size of the contract that he signed. And a lot of people blame him, that NFL rookies can't make the money that they used to make at one point in time coming into the league, and now there's some sort of cap around the dollar value that rookies can achieve. So, what are your overall thoughts on the interview? And then we'll jump into our thoughts on Jamarcus as a player in his playing days. But what were your thoughts on the interview?
So yeah, I want to say, was it 2 days ago? No, actually, it was Tuesday because they have an episode every Tuesday, and then they give you a surprise episode on Friday for the pivot. Well, not a surprise episode. It's if they have the ability to do so, they'll release the episode on Friday. And they had the pleasure of sitting down with Jamarcus Russell and having that
Hmm.
candid conversation. And so, for those who don't know who Jamarcus Russell is, Jamarcus Russell was the first overall pick of the 2007 NFL Draft, as quarterback. He was a standout talent at LSU. And was named the Sugar Bowl MVP back in 2007. I think he threw for 28 touchdowns or something like that, 8 interceptions. I think he had like 4,000 yards passing. And so overall, this guy was just this huge specimen, 6'5", 233, allegedly 233 pounds. And he could
253.
literally throw 70 yards from his knees. Like, that's unprecedented. So when you guys think about Patrick Mahomes and you think about the strength of his arm, honestly, Jamarcus Russell had a stronger arm than Patrick Mahomes. So that's a little context about him. But the question is, was he really a buzz? And we'll get to that momentarily. So the interview, I had the opportunity to listen in to the interview as I was working out yesterday evening, and I thought the interview was okay, and it wasn't okay based on the questions that Ryan, Shanning, and Freddie T were asking him. It was more so the level of, in my opinion, the engagement coming from Jamarcus. And I
For
would
sure.
say that Jamarcus in life is in a good space. Like, you can see him, like you look at his stature, he doesn't look like he's like out of shape. He look like he actually works out, and he
For
wants
sure.
to stay more physically fit, which is good. I think mentally he's there because he doesn't really care what the outside world has to say about him because he never interviews. And so, to his point, he had mentioned that he watched the Pivot interview Antonio Brown. He watched the Pivot interview Marshawn Lynch, and he said, "You know what? I came to an epiphany that I want to tell my story because
Hmm.
enable me. You guys would enable me to be in an environment comfortable enough to share some things that I never shared before." So when
Right.
he prefaced the conversation by saying that, or the interview by saying that, I'm like, "Oh shoot! Like, we about to get some heat."
Right.
And, and so Freddie T, Ryan, he tees up his questions. Now Ryan is a very sharp guy, and he's very meticulous as to how he plants seeds and asks questions. So if you ever watch the pivot,
I agree.
really really pay attention to how he asks questions, and he always circles back when he doesn't necessarily get the answer or the response that they're looking for, which is what media personnel, that's what they do. Like, he works for ESPN, he's great on the network. And then what I've liked to see is how Freddie T and Shannon bounce off that, and they're becoming very good at interviewing as well. And so Jamarcus was able to tell us a little bit about his upbringing and how close he was to his uncle Marcus. And his uncle Marcus was going through a few things around the time he was being drafted, so much so that they thought he was dead. I think it was the night before the draft or something like that, where he had passed out. And and that was due to, you know I don't think he necessarily said drugs, or it may have been alcohol. He might have been an alcoholic. So even, let me take it another step back. So one of the hot topics, right, is Jamarcus Russell and lean, which is, you know, a drug. And I don't want to really talk about that because I don't know the rules and regulations of YouTube as it pertains to talking about drugs. So I won't get into the educational component of what it is, but let's refer to it as lean. And
Yeah. Or
so,
cough syrup. Yeah.
cough syrup.
Yeah.
So even better, cough syrup. So one day Jamarcus was at a cookout in Alabama. That's where he's from. And down in the South, is it the South? Fago is a really big drink or popular drink, and so there's a cooler full of just different, an assortment of drinks. And you had the pineapple, the mango, Fuego, whatever. So he picks up one, he drinks it, and then he immediately knew that it was not your generic soda. It had a little bit more punch to it, a little bit more umph to it. And so when his uncle Marcus saw him take a sip of that drink, and he wasn't able to catch him quickly enough, he knew that he needed to get him into a hotel room so he can come down off that high. So from that day forward, his love for that particular cough syrup started to grow, and he used that to cope with stress. He used it to cope with pain, and I think over time that may have become his downfall. And so as he was preparing for the NFL draft, he had a lot of things going around him from a personal perspective. And so in today's age, we're very, I know myself as a black man, I know JT, we talk about mental health. Like, we talk about
For
mental
sure.
health, we do check-ins, we have very candid conversations. And I think people, or like athletes, have made it more um acceptable to say, hey, I was suffering through depression. Like, I had to take care of myself and do X, Y, and Z to make sure that I can contribute to the team, but handle myself first before I can get out there on that court. Like Kevin Love had to go through that. So it's more widely acceptable to admit when you're going through something. But when you think about 2007, like, it was over 10 years ago. um yeah, over 10 years ago. So people, mental health was really never a topic of conversation, especially in the black community. Like, let's make that abundantly clear. And so he was going through a lot. People were dying around him, like very close family members. His uncle was going through some things. He just had won an award before the draft, and you look at the photo of him holding the award, he wasn't even smiling. Like, when he got drafted, first overall pick in 2007, he wasn't smiling. Like, I could see the pain in his eyes. And so if you all have an opportunity to check out a really good YouTuber, check out this page called or this channel called Finlow Raps. And Finlow Raps is he's a YouTube narrator that talks about football, and he talks about the rise and the downfall of NFL superstars, or just really good NFL football players as well as college players. And so literally 2 weeks ago, he dropped a video about Jamarcus Russell, and he laid out all the facts. He does very in-depth research about these players. And so I had that video in mind as I was watching the Pivot interview, and I will say Femlo, from my perspective, has a lot of credibility. He is phenomenal. So back to the interview. During the interview, Ryan asked some really good questions. As they were talking, he kept blaming, like, the circumstances around him as to why he didn't perform the way in which everyone thought that he would perform, being the first overall pick.
Hmm.
And Ryan had asked him, he said, Jamarcus, I appreciate you sharing all this information, but where's the accountability? Where did you come? What were your shortcomings that contributed to you only lasting in the league for 3 years? Because he only lasted in the league from the 2007 season to the 2009 season.
Yep.
So being the first overall pick, that's a little alarming, right?
Yep.
So in my humble opinion, he st- he didn't take accountability for any of his actions. Like he mentioned, like, yeah, I could have worked out, I could have been more disciplined, I could have been more regimented, but the Raiders didn't enable me to have the necessary tools to be successful. He said, they always want the black man to come in and be the savior. He said there was nothing to save. He said we were effed from the jump because I didn't have any resources. So,
All right.
in, in closing, I thought the interview could have been so much more, and the questions were really good. But Jamarcus, I feel like his thought process was so limited that he couldn't tap into his bag a little bit and give Ryan, Shannon, and Freddie T a little bit more to talk about and to engage the audience. But I'm glad he interviewed. I thought the interview could have went better if Jamarcus would have opened up more. But overall, not a bad interview.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you made some great points there. I haven't finished the interview, but from what I did see, I agree with you. I didn't think there was. I think the biggest thing I'm learning, not to deviate too much, is that there's duality in life. Like there's the yin and the yang and everything. And so
Hmm.
on one hand, yeah, I really think Jamarcus didn't take much accountability, um, because there's the whole incident where they gave him the blank tape and it asked him, like asked him about the blank tape because we both play football, so film
Yeah,
study is a big part of football.
it's huge.
Whether you play offense or defense, a lot of how you show up on a Friday, a Saturday, or a Sunday, because this is at every level, is about watching film, being an intelligent player, and understanding the opponent's tendencies when it comes to being able to read plays. And at every level, as you move from Friday to Saturday to Sunday, that film study becomes that much more important.
Hmm.
Film study is a big part of why you've seen Joe Burrow, who came off of an injury, come in his sophomore year or second season in the league and lead the Cincinnati Bengals, one of my teams, who hadn't been to a Super Bowl in years,
I
lead
haven't
them
won
to
a playoff game in years.
hadn't won a playoff game in years, but lead
Yeah,
them to a
bumper
Super
bumper
Bowl.
Super Bowl.
Yeah, hadn't won a playoff game. You've seen them host a playoff game. You've seen them beat the Chiefs. You've seen them make it to a Super Bowl and get cheated, mind you, out of winning the Super Bowl. But we won't go. We won't go down there. But film is a big part of it, and keeping your body in shape is a big part of it. We see now that LeBron James spends $1 million a year on his body,
Hmm.
in terms of staying in peak performance, and now he's in season 20 of his career.
Yep.
So for I see that he didn't do what it took to play at that level, and I don't think he was committed to it. And I think a
Hmm.
big part of it is that back then, you know, as soon as they were drafted, as soon as they signed, those big contracts, that money started coming in. When
Hmm.
you lose the hunger a lot of times coming from these inopportune or at opportunity situations, um, and you see that type of money. Now you've been playing football your whole life to change your family situation, and now you've changed it. So now it's like,
Mm.
if I win the MVP, if I win a Super Bowl, I mean, you get that type of money with your first contract. Do you really have to do anything? Where you see a lot of guys now who have to come in and go hard because that first contract isn't really that
Yeah.
type of money. It's life changing, but it's not going to sustain it. So I gotta
Right.
go hard on this rookie contract in order to get that huge contract that changes the next generation and the generation after, right?
Right.
And so I don't think he worked hard enough. But at the same token, I see what he means about the Oakland Raiders. At that time, the Oakland Raiders did not have a lot of pieces around him. I think,
They
I
stink.
think, Yeah,
They
they were
stink
terrible, terrible. And I mean, they still aren't. They might be good this year, with Devontae Adams, but they just weren't a great organization um, at the time he was coming in. Um, and I think he came into a situation um, that wasn't right for his success.
for
And
sure.
I think you see now the teams are more poignant about drafting players that come from the area that the team is in. You see a lot of guys that maybe are from Louisiana go play
Hmm.
for the Saints or go
That's
play
real. Yeah.
for a team in the Deep South, or a guy being from New York or upstate area going to play for one of those northern teams and things of that
Hmm.
sort. So I think you see that more often than not. That plays a big part. Like if I'm
Hmm.
from North Carolina and I got to go play in California and I'm so far away from family, maybe that's not the best situation. So
Yep.
I think
That's
the
true.
onus is on both ends of it. The Raiders probably didn't do a great job of bringing this young um, African American male into their organization and putting handlers, putting uh, players and receivers, running backs, and folks around him to both be successful off the field and on the field. And I
Yeah.
think both go
Yep.
hand in hand. If you got the
It-
support, you got the success off the field, you're gonna play good on the field. You
oh,
know,
oh, for sure.
um,
All those things coincide with each other. And
for
to
sure.
he made a good point, and he made a really good point. He said, a lot of he said, and I've heard several really good players say this. He said, I'm not to downplay people, but he said some people need 10 hours of film. Like they gotta be in there for 10 hours because they're not that good. They're not gifted. They're not like
Yeah,
true athletes. He said,
yeah,
I don't need 10 hours of film. Keyshawn Johnson off, what do they call it? KJ&M, which is Keyshawn, J, Will, and Max. They have a show on ESPN at 7 a.m. Monday through
hmm
Friday, and it's phenomenal. If you get opportunity, check them out. Shameless plug. But
for sure.
Keyshawn Johnson used to say, coaches out like they be in the facilities all day because they don't want to go home to their families. They in there watching
Yeah,
film, like go home, be with your family. So he's, to Jamarcus' point, I don't need to look at 10 hours of film a day to know that XYZ person does this thing. And when you just 6'5", 250, strong arm, you pretty accurate for the most part. And, the biggest thing is understanding the coverages. You know what I'm saying? And having someone to teach you how to do that. And
yeah.
so if
I
they
think
weren't tapping into him like that, then
I think that was one of the more ignorant statements that he made.
mm,
And it's because Keyshawn Johnson was a wide receiver.
yeah,
So his purview on the game is totally different. A wide
I
receiver
agree.
does not need to watch as much film as a quarterback. A quarterback has to watch film because from
I
week to
agree.
week, you're playing against different schemes, and you need to both be watching film on your own. You need to be watching film with your receiving core and your
Hmm.
running backs so that
That's
you
real.
guys are able to talk about, hey,
That's real.
when I see this week and I go high, then I need you to go this way. And
Yeah.
or when I say Omaha, when we see that this week, this is the play we're running. We running all flies. When I call California, all flies, middle stop, because we
Mm.
know that they're blitzing that middle linebacker XYZ. You also need to watch it with your coaches so that you can say to the coach, "Hey, I see that every time they get in 4-2-5, this guy's coming. So,
Mm.
coach,
Mm.
I'm gonna audible out whenever I see this in the game, and I'm gonna run, running back dig or whatever play it is.
Or
I'm
option.
calling that.
Or or
I'm
or
calling it. I'm,
option
I'm
if they come crashing down the middle, you know what I'm saying? Pull that ball
right.
out, take off.
Right. But the
Yeah.
communication has to be there so that they know that you're going to do that in the game and they're in agreement with it. A
Yeah.
quarterback cannot play without watching film.
No,
The speed
I,
of
I
the
agree.
game
I agree. You can't
and
be watching
and
blank tapes.
yeah,
I
so
I, I
him
agree. But
so
10
him
hours
saying
though,
that he's an athlete, he don't need to watch 10 hours of film is BS if I ever heard it. I don't care how good you are. Like I've never played at the NFL level. I played at the high school level. I played at the collegiate level. You gotta watch film. You gotta watch film. It helps you get better. It helps you see yourself
Well,
and see the mistakes that you're making
hey, piss poor
versus looking
preparation
at
promotes
anybody
piss poor
else.
performance.
Right.
Yeah,
So you
that's
know,
real.
again to wrap that up, I think it's good to hear from Jamarcus Russell because I think the title of the biggest bust in NFL history, it's been a lot of discussion about that. So many people have had a lot of criticism about him as an individual. And I think a
Yeah,
lot of time in the world that we live in today, people feel that they could just say anything about people in the public sphere and not have any repercussions for it, or not take into account how they feel and what their point
yeah,
of view is. So I think it's great to hear his point of view.
yep,
Um,
yep.
to see it from that standpoint. Do I think he's the biggest bust in NFL history? No. I think
That's
Ryan
Ryan
Leaf
Leaf.
is.
That's Ryan
Yeah,
Leaf.
I think Ryan
That's
Leaf
Ryan
is.
Leaf.
But is Jamarcus Russell a close second? Probably so. I mean, probably so.
Yeah,
He's probably a close second. I mean, when you end your career after 3 seasons and you have more interceptions than you do touchdowns, um, yeah, I think we have to say, and that number's not really close. You got 23 interceptions, 18 touchdowns. You passed for 4,000 yards in your career,
65,
and
65% QBR.
and you got guys that pass for 4,000 yards in a season. Do we have to say you're a bust? Yeah, but
Yeah,
at least he also feels like, at least if I'm going to be the bust and they're saying I'm the biggest bust, that means I had to be something to be that. And he's right.
right.
He was something. He was a great college player, and as we see in both college basketball as well as football, sometimes the great college players don't translate
It's
and,
not.
and
It's not.
don't
Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it wasn't in God's plan for him.
it wasn't in the cards.
And
It wasn't
he
in the
had,
cards.
and he mentioned that you know, Freddie T had asked him, did you ever get any calls? Even though you were out of the league for so long, man, did any teams reach out to you? He said, yeah, in 2013, he had the Dolphins and the Bears.
Yeah.
And in 2013, he was training all that time. Like he said, he was really training. And he had a partially torn, and don't quote me if I'm wrong, like partially torn meniscus or something like that.
Hmm.
And his birthday is, I think he said August the 8th. The Miami Dolphins had called him August the 8th, but he had a surgery. He had a surgery scheduled for August the 10th. And so at that point, he's like, man, I don't even know if it's in the cards. But then, Ryan made a good point. And I understand you want to go out there on a bum knee. It's like, are you hurt or can you not play? Like, don't, like, you got to be
That's
able to
key.
differentiate the two.
That's
That's
key.
always the mentality in sports. Are you hurt? Because we all hurt, or you can't play.
Right.
So, yeah, man.
Yeah. So it's definitely um a sad situation. But the moral of the story to all young athletes out there is, you hear it all the time. It sounds cliche, but hard work beats talent. You can have all the talent in the world. You don't put the work in, it doesn't matter.